Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the COOs Corner podcast, the podcast exploring success factors in the world of business operations. My name is Tamar Nelson, your host and a specialist in the area of operational resilience. And today we are exploring the topic, how to build a virtual team that can help you grow your business. Wow. So, this is something that has been driving many of us crazy in the last 2 years, but it's something that has actually been around for a while now, trying to figure out how can we successfully lead a remote team? Is it a possibility or a pipe dream? Right. So today we're going to look at, how we can delegate decisions, how we can develop a resourceful team, how we can really get it right. And, we have with us none other than Richard Fu, right? He's the head of operations at Outsourcing Angel. And, when his team at Outsourcing Angel speaks about Richard, they will say that, he's next level, that he has radically redesigned and systematized and automated their whole virtual business. And, so that they can be more hands-off. Who doesn't want that? So we're in for a treat today, ladies and gentlemen. So Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Wow, Tamar. Now I'm scared right now. Like, I gotta live up to all of this hype, right? And so, I'll do my absolute best, and I hope that's enough for you guys here. And I'm more than happy to share some of the wisdom and the experiences and learnings I've gone through to help you guys and your audience here of particularly other COOs of how to actually free up their time so that they can do more of not just work but what they love. Right. And that's really what I'm here to do.
All right. So spoken like a true COO. So, on this podcast, we speak about all things operational and growth at the business level, at the individual level, right? And, how your team has spoken about you and even how you have introduced yourself just now, it's a powerful testimonial, I think. I'm curious to know, and I'm sure those listening are as well, what led you down this path of becoming a COO first and foremost?
I don't know, right? But I don't think any COO comes out of university thinking that's what I want to do, right? Like, I'm pretty sure I didn't even know what COO was, right? Even though I did, studies in business and all of that. I kind of stumbled into it, right? To be honest, so I went into university. All I knew was I liked technology and computers, so I wanted to do something in that area. So I did a double degree, right? One in business and finance, and then the other one in computer science. And so after that, I didn't know what I was doing after university. I'm just going like a kid going through university, enjoying what real adult life is, right?
Yeah.
In university. And then afterwards, I'm like, okay, I got to get something, right? And that's where some of my friends in the business side, so I did finance, but I had friends in accounting, and they're like, you should apply for one of these accounting firms. They're recruiting, they're looking for interns for summer vacation. And I was like, yeah, I guess they're, everyone keeps talking them up in their processes, so why not? So I applied to KPMG and eventually got offered a graduate spot there with them, and I was in their management consulting team for the IT division. Right. Yes. And then so I was there, and I thought, all right, the pathway is to partnership, right? To become a KPMG partner, and that's the goal, because
Right.
that's what the peak looked like there. And it was within like the first 6 months there. I'm like, I don't understand why, I want to be director or partner, because I looked over my desk and I see this director who's like, much older than me, and he's busting his balls, right, to just deliver this project. And he'd be there from like, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., just trying to finish some work. And I'm like, how is that like where I want to be? I don't think that's what I want to be like. I don't imagine that being the pathway to, at that point in time, like retirement, right, for me. And so, in all of that, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So I stuck it out at KPMG for another 6 to 8 years, right? And in that time, I started exploring more about personal development. And that's where I came across people like Tony Robbins, like T. Harv Eker, right? And I started going to their seminars and I bought their courses, and I started exploring more about myself first, and then how I could help other people. And then realized it got to a point, Tamar, where I'm like, I don't know why I'm helping these big companies make squillions of dollars, fire thousands of people every year. And I'm like, I'm not helping the world here, right? A direct impact to people. And so that's when I said, I'm going to quit my job, stop all of that. And I was running a little side hustle on the side, which was about, I guess I chose, of all things, how to be a love coach for people, right?
Really?
Yeah. And then that's how I got introduced.
And a COO, oh boy, this is very interesting.
And because I'm like, as an Asian man born in Sydney, parents were refugees from the Vietnam War. Then, we didn't have much when we grew up, and my parents were working really hard. And, a lot of my time was like, they were working so hard from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., in those typical, like what we call sweatshops, where there's sewing and all that. And sometimes we would come in and help, and I wouldn't get to have that much attention, especially because I'm one of 4 kids as well, right? And being the lucky middle child, right? I suffered from that middle child syndrome where, Richard's okay, he's doing good. There's a young one, and then there's a troublemaker one, and the parents' attention is divided. Richard's fine, he'd be fine. He looks like he's okay, and I felt like there was a lot of, I guess, unresolved issues within me of how do I love myself, right? Because I feel like I didn't get that when I grew up as much as I probably think I needed.
Wow, that's such an interesting story. And when I started doing this podcast, it was like strictly operations, and then I realized that if you're going to be successful, a successful CEO or a successful leader, it's an inside job first. And I'm very appreciative of what you just said in terms of it's that part of personal development and growth, because only by us going on that journey of personal development and growth that we can actually help our organizations to grow. If we are not growing, our organizations can't grow, our teams can't grow. So it starts with the man in the mirror. We have to look at ourselves and start there. So thank you for sharing that. Right. And, one of the interesting things that, about COOs, and that came out in some of the episodes, is that, CEOs need to be working on the business, like at the top level, and not being in the day-to-day. Right. And, how have you done this? How have you been able to help as a COO deal with the day-to-day so that the CEO can do the strategic things?
That's a good question. And that comes down to, from how I've learned it, is because I went out to run my own businesses and be CEO, right? Of my own small businesses. So when I left the corporate world, I started those businesses, the Love Coach one that transformed to a men's coach program, which then led me from being in Australia going, I need to take this to Asia. I went over to Singapore, right? Try to help Asian men. And I realized I went through those hurdles and downfalls, right? To the point where, Tamar, I kept working myself. I'm like, why does it feel so weird for me to be at the front? So even doing this podcast, right, and being, in the spotlight is weird for me, because naturally that's not what it is for me. And that's when I realized, Tamar, right, I did my own podcast show. I interviewed guests, and one of my guests was Dan Priestley, the man who wrote Key Person of Influence. Right?
Wow.
And I asked him, what makes an amazing entrepreneur? And he's like, an amazing entrepreneur is not the one that chases the spotlight, right, or in the spotlight. He's the one that controls the spotlight and shines it on other people in his team. And I thought, holy crap, that's me, right? I don't want to be in a spotlight. I don't want to be CEO. I don't want to be number one. I'm better at being number two, let's say, right? And shining that spotlight on number one, right? And so after running these businesses, I realized for myself, you know what? I don't want to be running my own show. I don't need that, right? And so that's how come I reached out to Lynn, right? Our founder here at Outsourcing Angel. I'm like, we tried to talk and do some business for 2 to 3 years. Nothing happened, but we did a little bit. And I said, look, Lynn, you know my experience. I love VAs. I understand how your business runs. If you have a position for me, then I'm happy to talk more. And that's how we talked. And she literally created a position for me on the spot because she saw and I'm like, I don't want to be in a spotlight. Then all I want to do is support someone that I really believe, adds a lot of great value to the world. I'm like, that's you at the moment, right? That's all I know. And so I'm like, I want to work for you, Lynn, and make you better, right? Make you shine brighter than you ever thought you could. And that's what made it, I guess, focus for me of understanding where does she need to play. And so as a COO, I don't wait for the CEO to tell me what to do, right? I think ahead for her because yes, the CEO has to look after the day-to-day thing. At the same time, you also have to have a lens in the strategy side and the vision and the future side. And, there was points where, the CEO is very often, right, very visionary, so they don't get the details and they can come off as fluffy of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And so the way I see my role is they have a vision and then it's for me to help ask the right questions and clarify the vision so that then I can translate that downstream to the day-to-day teams, right? So that they understand what we're trying to do. And the idea for me is to free up Lynn's time or the CEO's time so she can sit there and literally be in the room, sit on her chair, chill out and think about what else can we be doing? How else can we grow the business? And that thinking time is not just for her. I want to spread that down the line because that's how you create reflection time that leads into innovation within the company. So I'm not just top end has to create ideas. It's bottom up can come up with ideas and be like, hey, I noticed this. And it's like, oh, that's a really good idea. Let's talk about that.
Wow, you mentioned so many gems just now. One of them key is that, to be a good COO, you would have to run businesses, have industry experiences, failed, won, and have that collective wisdom so that you can really, really help to the organization to shine and to even scale, because you mentioned the innovation, the curiosity, that thinking time, that reflection time is so key. How do you allow for that in your teams? What do you do and how do you capture and those seeds and allow them to grow so that your organization can grow, Richard?
Oh, that's a really good question, right, Tamar? And it's not easy because when I came in, everything was a mess because, that's pretty much how it is, right? And any company behind the scenes is a mess, right? And for me, I think, especially if you're a startup and, you're building up and you're hitting that growth or scale zone in your business, it's very easy to get sucked into, especially because you've been doing it for years, probably at that point of, I have to be busy doing stuff. I got to be busy. And I talk about this when I was running one of my businesses, which was basically systemizing and helping people find virtual assistants with my consulting help. Is one of the myths is there's this, we carry around this belief that, having this badge of busyness makes us awesome. And so people, when you talk to me how are you, oh, I'm so busy, right? And then everyone's like, oh, you must be so important because you're so busy all the time, right? But, I think of it and I'm like, it's not, no business owner, when they start out a business, actually wants to be busy. You start out a business because at the end of the day, you kind of want an ATM machine, right? You go in, take out money whenever you want it, but it just has money there, makes money for you, And so I thought about that and I'm like, in order to build something like that, you have to, of course, invest into the people and the foundations of the business. And so the way we do it is I had to break that mindset, not just from Lynn and the CEO, but all the way down, because, whatever you lead as, it permeates through your team, and so the whole team was always like, we're busy, we're doing this stuff. And I'm like, guys, the idea is you're creating manual work for no reason aside from just to keep yourself busy and say, I got a job, right? But my job here is to release you of that because I want it. And I say this to Lynn, right? It's like, I want the business to be boring. Business should be boring. Why? That means it's predictable. What that means is I put this much effort in, I know the result will be this, right? And we're trying to turn that so that it's predictable enough so that we're comfortable. And what that means is when it's boring, it means, you then have space and time to look at new things, right? Versus running from fire to fire.
I'm going to challenge you right there.
Yeah.
Most of the COOs listening are like, what is Richard talking about? We're always busy. We're always putting out fires. And in this time of this, endless disruptions, how can we have boring, calm time? Break it down for us, Richard. How is that possible?
And look, I say we're striving for boring, doesn't mean we have it, right? And so it's also about making that time. And this sounds very cliche, right? Like you don't put it in your calendar, it ain't happening kind of thing, right? You don't measure it, then you don't know how you're going. Yeah. And so for us, I make sure it's very important that, I don't really mind how busy a team can be, right? Whether you're marketing, operations, or whatever. But I always say, we have to have regular meetings where there is time to breathe, right? And that time to breathe allows people to slow down, gather their thoughts together. And, for me, my direct reports that work with me, I set up like monthly one-on-ones, which is the time for them to reflect. And it's not those performance management one-on-ones where it's like, hey, let's talk about how you're going with your performance. It's more like personal check-in where I created like a document and it's just pretty much 4 questions I asked them, which is, all I want to do is put my finger on their pulse just to feel how are they going as a person, and also give them an opportunity to create some sort of small reflection point, right? So you have to create these points of calmness, reflection for them because most people won't do it for themselves, right? Because they won't see the point.
And this is in a virtual team. You're doing this one-on-one check-in reflection. Now, what would that conversation look like?
Yes, it's a good question. So the 4 questions I get them to do, and this is so they have a spreadsheet. They enter in like a line or a paragraph, however long they want, and all it is I say, even if it's you, Tamar, even if you just take 5 minutes before our meeting to fill this in, that's enough for me to create some level of reflection within yourself. And so I ask, okay, Tamar, what's one thing you're excited about right now? Personal, work, I don't mind. Yeah. The second thing I flipped out on the head is, what is the one thing you're worried about? Personal, work. I don't mind. And the reason I ask those two is I just want to know where your headspace is at and what are you like focusing on? And so if there's worries within their role or the business, then I go in to explain why, don't worry about that because we have these things in place, right? Third question I ask, and this is from one of the teachings I got very early on at KPMG was, my manager at that time would say, your job, Richard, is all you have to do is think about how to make your boss's life easy, right? Think about that. And then you fly up the ladder. And I'm like, cool. But as I got up and I started managing teams, I'm like, I also want to focus down. And so I asked my team here, I'm like, hey, what's one thing I can do to make your life easier at work here? And that's where they get that time of reflection, like, oh, I got a headache over here with this little process, or I noticed this. And then that's how we can create, I guess, the foundation for, critical thinking, giving them more space to help, create better resources and innovate things in the company. And then the last question I ask is, what's one thing you want to work on, this month to be better at your job, right? And that's where it's feedback, coaching type of moments in those times. And that's kind of like what takes probably half an hour at most. Sometimes the meetings go for 45 minutes, an hour. And that's because I create that space there, even though I could be doing a lot of other things. The most important thing to me as a COO, as you say, is, I think somewhere you were saying in one of the videos is the CEO is like the heart of the company, right? And the driver. And I believe that, but I believe like, in order for that to function, we have to have a team that's functioning together, right? And in order for that to happen, the driver needs to go and check the tire, check the engine pressure, check the oil pressure, whatever else. And this is what I do is I say this to my team, they understand it often is, yeah, I'm busy. Sometimes I'm not really busy. But what's important is if you need time with me, whatever it is, personal stuff that's going on, you need an ear, just come talk to me, right? I will make time, for it. And, and it's not about saying that, but it's about doing that
Yeah.
and doing it in a responsive manner for them to be like, Richard supports me. And this is why I do it. Tamar is like, I do it because eventually I may call on them to go, hey, something's hit the fan and we need to do things and you need to stay back and I need your help, right? And I just need your help. And it's to get them to stay on to do it because it's not because of the job, but because I want to help Richard. I want to help the company, and that's the bigger motivating force.
So there's a number of things coming out there in pulling that out, Richard, is leadership, but not just leadership, is coaching. And there has to be, there's a constant communication and there has to be a level of trust. And I think that's one thing that a lot of virtual teams suffer with is that trust factor. And, you have just shared how you have overcome those hurdles, because when you look at a virtual team, we're looking at people working across time and space, and, organizational boundaries sometimes. And we have to use these technology to communicate and collaborate, which is very hard because some studies have shown that companies who go virtual fall short of their goals, and some even rate it unsuccessful. And, but there is good news in the space because we are seeing, especially in the pandemic, that, well-managed virtual teams can actually outperform those who, are together in a space. And have you seen this to be true?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's harder. When I say it's harder because it's different, right? It's different being in a remote team versus a team in the office. Because it's very easy for you to walk past, you notice someone's body language of like, oh, they're slunched over the keyboard and they're like, oh my God, or their head's like this. And, that, right? It's harder to notice those things because you're not there. But in that space, I was talking to one of my friends in change management, and she's like, I find it very hard to to do, virtual calls like this because it's just, I miss out on a lot of body cues. And I think the transition for a lot of people, the problem is also they don't turn on video. So for us, like internally, like unless your internet is struggling really hard, right, for that day, I always, and this is something not that I put down, but more like Lynn enforces, hey, she'll ask you, hey, how come your camera's not on, right? And I've heard like from other companies where people just rock up on a meeting and they treat it like a teleconference call where all the cameras are off, right? And, everyone's muted. And I'm 100% sure like 90% of those people are not paying attention, and, in saying that, even with us, people with videos on, I may not be always paying attention either. But at least I can read cues of like if I'm announcing something and then one of their faces goes, what's that mean, right? Then I call it out. And that's the other thing too, is I think for some leaders, they're really afraid to call out someone because they may feel like it's like, what's the word? It's like targeting someone.
Yeah.
Right. That, hey, they're not, I'm like, hey, Tamar, looks like you don't understand what I said. Right. And then that can create anxiety for the person. But in our team, I've created that, I guess it's about creating that safe space so that then I was like, I'm not targeting you on purpose. I'm just, because I notice it, I want to call it out to see, is there something I can do to make it clearer for you?
Right. So
and
open and
honest. Yeah, right. So that they feel supported in that space. So like, yes, it's harder in remote teams, but harder just means different.
Yeah.
And once you start building in the right channels. And this is the thing, I think a lot of people move to remote and they think they don't need to communicate as much, but you pretty much need to communicate as much, if not at the start anyway, more than being in person in office, because you need to establish those relationships and you need to get ask for that time. And so this is what we tell our clients is, one of the big things is most clients will come in who fail, they just don't communicate with their VA, right, or their virtual assistant. And for us, it's like you need to communicate early on and set that foundation of trust, so that then there is no question of like, where's this person all the time, right? And it's about creating that foundation, putting in the hard yards first.
So in the beginning, it's like almost daily communication. Then in that example with the VA, you'd have to do that on a daily basis, and then you can move to weekly, but the communication is important, especially in the onset.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, and you can scale it back. Like we used to not do meetings much at OA here, right? We used to do like, I think a weekly meeting, but we changed that, I think last year, where we implemented daily huddles. So like, Scrum, Agile type of meeting, where just like, hey, what are you doing? What are you stuck on? And we do it like that. Correct, stand-ups, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and so we do that, and I always encourage all our clients to have a daily stand-up if they can, even if it's just you and your VA. What you need to feel as a business owner or CEO is to make sure that the people in your team are doing things.
Yeah.
And absolutely. That's just enough on that end.
And I think that's the fear that most persons or leaders have, in the virtual space, not knowing what's happening, not knowing if they're working or not, and so some have chosen to just go straight, forget the virtual, it's strictly face-to-face, because I can't touch and feel it. But you have just outlined how you can actually get that feel. And I'm sure there are systems in place that can help you to measure this, and project management tools that you can use to track progress and really measure the outcomes. And a mixture of lead and lag indicators, so that you can definitely see what's happening in the space. Thank you for that, Richard. I want to, we're coming to the close of this podcast. What, in terms of, based on what you have seen persons doing in the space in the last 2 years or so, what would be your top tips, probably top 3 tips or so would you give to an organization in terms of building a high performing virtual team?
Top 3 things is, I guess, building a remote team, you need to have the right systems and processes in place to build that expectation for them as to, this is how we want things done. This is how I want communication to look like, the check-ins, that type of stuff. This is the process, right? And you need to have very strong systems and processes in place to make it work that way, so that you leave it very little room for major error, on that end there. Right. At that same time, the second point is probably you just need patience. A lot of people are just like, I just want to get a virtual assistant in and bang, they hit the ground running, right? They know everything about the business. I want someone like that. And I'm like, that takes time, and that takes, big focus of your energy to pass that energy, that understanding, the knowledge across as well, because it's not just about the systems and processes, it's about them understanding you, understanding the business, understanding the products, the services you're selling, right, as well as the tone and how you want the brand to be represented, your values. That doesn't just happen in a week. You can tell them in a week, but doesn't mean they embody it. And I think the last thing is you have to stay committed to it, right? When I say committed to it, it's like, it's not a thing that let's just test this out and see for a month. It's a long-term thing, because at the end of the day, like COVID has taught or shown many people, wow, you can work from home, avoid the long 1 hour one-way commute or whatever it is, and still get the job done, right? Isn't that amazing? And more people want that now. And so, companies have to be open to this. And in order to make that work, they have to be committed to also, one, including them as the team. So like, even if you have people in the office and, you have a remote call, like that commitment needs to be upheld of not just, having people at home, but things like, enforcing is probably the wrong word, but encouraging them to turn on their video, even if, they don't have the greatest background or whatever, right?
Right.
It's about having the commitment to follow through with the standards or the expectations that they set up, right, in that space. And that's on managers and leaders to follow that through. And so if you don't follow through, people will just learn to keep pushing the boundaries more of what they don't have to do, and so there's a requirement for it to be, you have to be committed to upholding the standards, because at the end of the day, your standards could be up here, but if you tolerate this is your real standard here. Right? The standard is what you tolerate, not what you set.
Exactly. Wow, powerful words. Wow, Richard. And if that's so profound. And if you were to point a COO, you're talking about systems and processes. I'm an industrial engineer by profession, so by training. So it's you're speaking my language. Where where would you point them for resources in terms of where they can look to when they're looking at their teams and how to build up the teams and make them more efficient and build these systems? Where can they look to for a resource?
Yeah, there's some good places. Obviously, you got our website, right? Outsourcingangel.com, which is a great place where we're sharing more about those things, about systems, processes, automations. Another one, if you're looking for really good like processes, is I think it's called System Hub, right? Or Systemology. They're very good in terms of like explaining how to document your systems properly in a way that works, right? They're really good as well. And I guess one of the other great assets that has helped us a lot is the Scaling Up group, all right, or the book as well, from Vern Harnish. It's an amazing book. It's one of the things that we set up so that even just these meetings and how frequent these meetings happen within our team internally to create those channels, right? So people don't end up being siloed in, right? Is really big here as well. So there's some really good resources from it.
Oh, those are fabulous tips there. Thank you so much for sharing. And Richard, at the end of every interview, I always ask my guests one last question that, because I believe, and you have shared a few, but I believe there's so much power in the questions that we ask. In your career, which is very diverse, what is one question that you frequently use when you're working with teams to get the best outcomes?
The one question I ask myself in those situations is, is there something I'm not seeing, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's me. So if something goes wrong, I never go in and go, hey, and just blast the person, right? Mm-hmm. I go, there's probably a reason why they did it that way. Not many people in the world go around trying to be evil and be bad and screw up at work, right? So there has to be something else. Surely, even if it looks like they totally screwed it up, I'll be like, hey, look, so I'll ask myself, there has to be another way, right? That a perspective that I have not been able to see. So I ask, so hey, Tamar, like, this thing happened. I just want to understand, like, how did we get here? What's going on through your head when you were doing this and how we got this result. And it's just really, I'm just seeking to understand how they think so that then I can coach them through. I'm like, that's great. I understand you better. I'm going to share with you how we think here. And this is why I or we would do it in this manner.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Richard. This was just delightful. I want to thank you for all of those gems that you have shared today. It was a wealth of information. You are really, I can see the systematic and organized thinker who loves to implement and optimize processes with people and achieve efficiency. That's what you see on his LinkedIn profile, and you saw it coming out here today. Thank you again. So to you, our listeners, to you, our listeners, I want to thank you for listening. And I know you got a ton of value from this conversation. Share in the comments what you like most from this episode. You can continue the conversation with Richard. You can, connect with him on LinkedIn, or you can visit outsourcingangel.com.au, and I'll put the information in the resources for you. I really hope that you are challenging the status quo with this information that you gained today, and I want to hear all about it. You can find me at Tamar, tamarnelson.com, or on LinkedIn at Tamar-Nelson. And if you want to be a guest or share feedback or suggestions, you know where to find me. I love to hear from you. And please free to share the links with your friends and subscribe and on Apple or on Spotify. And please join us again for another time for another information-packed episode. Stay curious, continue to improve, and as we say in Jamaica, until next time, walk good.